there that you trained at Berkeley as a natural chef. And what does that mean?
I did, yeah. So, natural chef, kind of holistic chef, very similar kind of vibe. And that was kind of sort of like putting nutrition at the heart of how you build your meals and your cooking. So rather than doing the traditional French style cookery where you learn all the mother sauces and then you learn this and like really fancy restaurant plating, it was very much learning how to put, seasonal, organic, unrefined, like cooking from scratch and local food at the heart of your cuisine. And we learned all through the way of cooking at the same time as learning how to cook for health and looked at various different health conditions and all that kind of stuff. So it was a really broad ranging training, which wasn't available in the UK at the time. So I'm from London, so I went over to California to do the training. This was 11 years ago. Things have changed now. There's places to do things similar in the UK. But yes.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I was going to ask you if there was a Berkeley in the UK, but you came over to California.
No, I came to California. There isn't a Berkeley in the UK. No, there's various nutrition colleges in the UK, and some of the professional cooking colleges now offer courses that kind of sort of look at nutrition in a bit more depth as well. So the landscape has changed vastly in the last 11 years there, which for the better. Yeah.
I think I mean, that's amazing that they're starting to incorporate that now, but you would think that that's kind of important because food should be nutritious because it's feeding us so that we can, be well, hopefully, and not just taste good.
Oh yeah, I agree. I think the way that traditional cooking schools are set up, it's very much to train industry chefs so that they go out there and work in restaurants and run everything like that. Whereas, doing a natural chef training or anything that's a bit more holistic is more about how you can use that for good in other ways. So not just about restaurants, private chefing, more for everyday food, all of that kind of stuff. So I think they sort of I agree with you. I think cooking should always be, apart from when it's obviously for a treat, but it's sort of different two kind of ways of thinking about what you're going to do professionally with food. And I think previously maybe it was just geared towards restaurant cookery.
Mm-hmm. Last night we were watching, I don't remember the name of the chef because it was the first time I saw him on YouTube, and he was making pancakes, and my husband was all about learning how to make these super fluffy pancakes. And he was just like scooping butter, and I was like,
yeah, that's the
I
secret
love
to make
butter.
everything taste good.
But it was a lot. It was a lot,
Yeah.
even for me. So yeah, well, that's amazing. And so did that set the tone or the foundation for this veg-led recipes that you favor?
Definitely. Yeah. So before I did my chef training, I don't think I really understand. I mean, I grew up in the suburbs of London, like not a country idealistic life. So I wasn't really very much in tune with like food and the seasons and really even never even gave it much thought. So kind of that being the heart of our cooking really sparked with me, and making food really colourful and nutritious by using vegetables kind of sort of came out of my chef training. Yeah, so that's probably where it started. And of course, the cuisine in California is incredible. So the farmers markets and even the, supermarkets there with their vast veg sections, kind of, it was really hard you'd have been mad not to get inspired by cooking with veg through what you had available. So yeah, that was where it started for me.
And what about that picture that you have on your website where you look like you're at a farmer's market? Is that in the UK?
Yeah, I love that actually. I had that taken quite a few years ago now, but opposite where I used to live, and it's like a brick wall with ivy above it, like on the edge of a council estate. And I've made it look like it was at a farmer's market. Obviously, I went and bought all the produce from a local market and
Oh,
finished it
wow.
up there. I always think I'm like lying to everyone. It was actually in like central London. But
Oh,
never mind.
nice. Well,
The art of the
great.
internet.
Yeah, and great staging because it looked amazing. I was like, oh, I want to go to that market. And okay, so I know we're gonna talk about retreats because you have a lot of experience, and then we're gonna
Yes.
get into the book, the cookbook. But you've been cooking or you have cooked for over 70 retreats around the world. Is that right?
Yes, I have. That's right. Yes.
Yeah, a lot. So what are some lessons that you've learned in those 70 retreat.
Oh, wow. I was kind of sort of thinking about this before now, just so I could kind of like remember all the retreats I've done. So I would say that the majority of the retreats that I've done have been in the UK. So short weekend retreats, um, anywhere between 1.5 to like 5 hours drive from my house. And they're quite simple. And then the ones that I've done abroad have been across Europe. So in Portugal, Spain, Italy, France, yeah, those 4 countries. And I'd say that the lessons that I've learned as a chef have been greater on the ones that are abroad because it's just much harder cooking in a country that's not your own, with the produce, the shopping, just getting out and about, not having your own car, and all of that stuff. So I would say that I learned lots of lessons then. But I guess for me personally, you can't please everybody, but I think that's a motto for life anyway. So you can do your absolute best, and you can't please everybody. And to know your worth in terms of charging, that's something that I got quite wrong, I think, in the first couple of years. Was much better after that. So those are definitely the things that I would say my biggest life lessons.
Hmm. So the charging pricing is can be challenging for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Without giving me any details, can you tell me like what was the percentage of the jump? Does that question make sense? Like what I'm
I'm
saying
not quite
is,
sure what you mean.
oh, I was charging way less than I was worth, and I had to figure that out. And once I was
Yeah.
pricing correctly, it ended up being 50% more or 60% more or something like that.
Definitely 50% more. I mean, obviously,
It's
inflation has
great.
been a massive thing over the last 10 years. It's gone up vastly. Everything has gone up vastly. The price of olive oil at the moment is one. But, and when you start out, you're obviously going to charge a lot less than you will when you've had a vast amount of experience. So that's probably the other reason why my fee went up so much, because it was, compensating for my experience and my knowledge as well as inflation. So the graph's a bit steeper, I would
Hmm.
say. Yeah, and like some of my fees in that first couple of years of retreat chefing were just when I worked with a few yoga retreat companies who just said, "This is how much we pay our chefs," and I was very keen for the experience, so I did it. And then sort of later on, when I came to realise, no, I'm worth more and asking for more, or when I was working with individual teachers, not part of a company, and been able to work that out, and the complications of the number of people vastly changing, how much you charge, and splitting food costs and labor costs and working everything out. Yeah, it took me a while to kind of get to grips with that in terms of how you structure that.
Wow. I didn't even think of all those factors. And
Yeah,
especially
it's a lot.
the food, because the food prices change. And so do you combine that in the fee, or do you have your service fee and the food purchasing fee
Separate. It depends at the time of like quoting somebody. If they just want an indicative cost, I could say, "Oh, you have 16 people. This is how much it would cost," and I just give them an overall fee. But if they don't know how many people they're going to get on their retreat, they might have 11, they might have 20. If it's 20, I need an assistant chef. If it's 11, it's a lot easier for me. So you don't quite need to charge as much. So I kind of work it out on a sliding scale. So sometimes in that way, it's easy to go, this is the chef fee and this is the food fee, because the chef fee doesn't hugely change whether it's like 11 or 15 guests, but the food fee was. So it depends on who I'm working with. And if it's someone I've worked with before, then obviously it doesn't need to be quite so complicated because they know how it works. But yeah, I do both, and it depends on the individual client and what they want and how that's all been figured out, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So in your experience, what has been the biggest challenge other than pricing and other than being in a different country where you have to figure things out?
The biggest challenge. The hardest retreat I did was because there were 50 people on it. And it was over New Year. It was like a New Year's retreat, and we were still coming out of COVID. I was meant to have a team of 4 chefs. Couldn't find a fourth one. The third one got COVID, so just 2 of us did it in the end. I've never worked so hard in all my life. Um, so sometimes staffing is quite difficult. I think just trying to get the numbers of food right for that many people, because the more you have, the more variance there is. So definitely, that was probably my steepest learning curve, of being on the job, for sure.
In situations like that, do you, I'm asking because I have no idea. I'm just thinking of what I would do with zero experience. The first thing is let's buy as much food as we can so that we don't run out.
Yeah, but then I did that. I still ended up with too many. I took like 5 celery eggs home or something. I was like, why have I got so many celery roots if you don't know what celery is? And it just trying to get it right is really hard. And then running out of things like, it's just really, really hard to scale your recipes up to that quantity when you've never done it before and knowing how much people are going to eat. So yeah, I did buy a little bit too much food. A couple of meal times, maybe I didn't quite make enough for it to feel really generous, which was a really hard lesson to learn because that's never what I want to do. I always want to make sure the food's plentiful. So yeah, and I remember making soup one day. I've been peeling potatoes, sweet potatoes for like 2 hours and just not quite
Wow.
figuring and you're planning how long the prep takes when you're cooking for that many people. It's not my kind of idea of fun. I agreed to do it because I thought it would be a good challenge and it was, but didn't did it for him.
Yep. Challenge. I did it. Don't want to do it again. Thank you.
Yeah, done. Tick box.
Yes. So what about some of the most rewarding moments?
I think when obviously people are very grateful and thankful and enjoy the food and give you immediate feedback, and it's something that as a recipe writer, when you sit in your home and you write a recipe and you publish it, and you have no idea what happens when it goes off into the thin over the internet, you don't get any feedback. So having that direct feedback from people is a really rewarding place to be. Or people who say, you know, they feel healthier after eating my food for the weekend, or that it's inspired them to go home and, you know, cook some of my recipes or cook with more vegetables, or that it's brought them, you know, people often go on a retreat when they're lacking a bit of direction or need a bit of a reset in their life, and to be able to send them out in the right way, having nourished them with the food, it feels really rewarding to do that for people. And to convince people like they're like, oh, I don't eat beetroot, and then I cook a recipe and they try it and they're like, I really like it done like this. It's kind of like being able to change people's opinions and minds about stuff and kind of like opening it up. I find that really rewarding.
Yeah, that's the best part. And how convenient and just, yeah, convenient to have a book or to have a cookbook, a recipe book where you're cooking these things for people at the retreat. And then, oh my God, this is amazing. And you can tell them, well, you can purchase my book and make it at home yourself.
Yeah, that was always been like, I always wanted to write a book. So, and I've been probably wanted to write a book before I started doing any retreat stuffing or anything like that. So to be able to have, you know, when I was writing it, to be able to use lots of recipes that I've already tested out and people that I know people really enjoyed, bring it in. And then after it came out, to be able to cook those things for people. And that way, that's been really nice as well.
Mm-hmm. So how do you think that this cookbook could be great for people who are just starting out as retreat chefs or even retreat hosts that want to, you know, dive into cooking themselves, but they want to make sure it's something healthy. It's something, like you said, it's been tried, it's been tested, so they just follow it.
For sure, yeah. I mean, the recipe book itself, let's stop a bit here, matches my jumper, just almost not
Nah.
quite as actually. All the recipes are scaled for 2 people, which is very different from retreat stuffing, where you're like, usually for me, the average number is about 14 to 16. So you do need to scale up your recipes and you do need to know how to do that. But I have shown in real life that that's possible because I do it all the time. And in a lot of my recipes that I use in retreats, I scale down to use in the book. But what it does do is show you, you know, what is a simple but delicious and beautiful dish that you could cook. And then, you know, obviously scale that up. I quite like simplicity in my cooking. So I'm often seeing other people on Instagram, especially sharing what they're cooking on retreats. And they'll be like, 5 dishes for dinner. And I'm like, well, dishes. 2 or 3 is plenty. So, and to make each dish quite simple. So you might have two vegetables mostly in one dish, 2 in another, rather than making it really, really complex and making life difficult for yourself. And I think that approach to my chef work is exactly the same approach to my cooking at home. Like, I don't need to flip around and make things complicated because I've got too many other things to do. So I think, yeah, from that, and lots of like the veg hero main dishes, for example, like a stuffed aubergine dish, which can be, you know, half or a whole aubergine on a plate looking beautiful, where you might have meat, for example, at home. So it's kind of main meat and two sides kinds of approach to some of my recipes that work really well in that retreat format. And then lots of like useful salads and things that you can prepare ahead so that, not everything has to be served hot because that's quite stressful too on a retreat. So yeah, lots of inspiration for using all sorts of different seasonal produce.
And it starts with veg, mostly vegan, mostly vegetarian, plant-based? Is it flexitarian? Did I read
It's
flexitarian?
Flexitarian.
Yeah.
Flexitarian, yeah, that was the word my publishers wanted to use. And 2/3, I actually made sure when I was planning it, that 2/3 of the recipes are vegetarian, which is very much the approach of how I eat myself. So, but not excluding meat or fish, because for me personally, I like to bring a little bit into my diet. And some of the bits of meat and fish that are used in some of the recipes might be like a whole piece of fish with, incorporated into the dish. And it might be that I've used a little bit of anchovies or a little bit of pancetta. So even though 2/3 of the dishes have got meat in, quite a lot of them can be made vegetarian very easily. I've been doing it myself for the last couple of months, and I've been cooking them out in the real world. And then if you're vegan and you're smart enough to know how to make the swaps, you could fill everything else as well, take the cheese out and do something different with the dairy. So for sure. But, I decided I didn't want to write a book that was like a retreat book, because I think that's a very niche market, people who would buy it. So I think there's a market out there for a book that scales recipes up to 16 and is really, I hate to test that book though. You're making
Yeah.
gargantuan portions of cheese. But for the, most books are for practical home cooking. And so that's kind of like what I wanted to do.
And that could even be a great gift for the retreat attendees if you don't have your own recipes.
Yeah. Because people always ask for them. I mean, I've been sharing my recipes on my website and social media for about 10, 11 years. I've always been like, you want my granola? Which I make it's on my website. Because I just kept getting asked for stuff. So I was like, well, I better publish it. But people generally, whatever you cook them, even if you cook somebody else's recipes, they'll still want it because that's inspired them to go and then make it themselves. So yeah, having your own book is a calling card, or sharing mine, it's a really good idea.
And I've used ChatGPT is amazing for food and recipes. I use it a lot in cooking. Have you ever?
I need to explore more. I've looked a few things up, like I've got this, I don't know what to do with it. Have you got any ideas? And it's come up with some quite interesting things. No, I haven't had the time or the energy to. You need to know what to ask it and to get the right thing out. So I'm just work more on that. But yeah, it's quite a minefield what it can do for us, I think.
Maybe it could help to scale, like I could go to your book, get one of your recipes and say, okay, now I need you to help me turn this into something for 20 people.
Yeah. Well, that I would hope that, so there's lots of, I don't know if you know, there's lots of things you need to tweak when you're scaling. So if you've got a recipe for 2 people that's got 1 chili in it and you're cooking it for 16, you don't then have 8 chilies because that would be too hot. So spices, garlic, even sometimes onions, you don't always double them to the amount that you're cooking for. And depends on how many batches you're doing, the size of your pot, and all sorts of stuff. So we did actually a day on large scale cookery at college, which was really helpful to kind of like understand all the theory behind that.
That's good to know. I totally would have doubled it.
GPT knows, but it's like doubling a recipe is okay. That's usually fine because there's not much variance. But when you go into like tripling, quadrupling, you just have to be a bit more careful with them, especially your seasonings.
Okay. Have you ever thought about coaching retreat chefs? Mentoring?
I have, just never quite got around to thinking about it more than going, oh, that'd be quite a good idea. I had all sorts of ideas before the pandemic and was kind of ready to go. And then the pandemic hit, and like obviously the industry completely fell apart with the pandemic. And it gave me so much time to not be doing that I kind of just felt that. And then I started doing a bit more writing and things kind of changed a bit. So no, I didn't. But there's a lot of knowledge in my brain of what I've been doing that I'm sure other people would find useful. So
yes, I think so too. So, okay. So when you were cooking at retreats, how do you feel about letting people in the kitchen and cooking with you?
Oh, no.
No?
Actually, quite frequently I would do a workshop on a retreat. maybe like here's how to make loads of healthy salads or something, and then we'd end up eating them for our lunch. That takes a lot of careful planning from me to make sure, I teach a lot of cookery, so I'm used to that, but kind of making that all work in a way that we don't have a stupid amount left over for extra food or making little snacks or something. But I love when people come in the kitchen, because often they're coming for a cup of tea or coffee, and it's always served in the kitchen. But actually coming in and helping you prepare dinner, I think would be quite stressful. Much easier just to get on with things and do them yourself.
Yeah.
Unless you're running a cookery retreat, which I'd always hoped I would do one day, and I've never quite found the right venue that would work for that. I always said as soon as I found the right venue that would work for it, I'd maybe think about going for it.
So what made you stop wanting to transition away from retreats into what you're doing now?
Well, I've actually been I kind of like had a portfolio career for quite a long time. So when I started out in food, I realized that you can't really just concentrate on one thing unless you go and get a job in a restaurant or something like that. It's very hard to be a food writer full time, even though I would love to. And yeah, so kind of I just decided the last kind of couple of years, I think the pandemic was probably the reason, even though I continue to do them, that I just felt like maybe I'll go back to it at some point, but I'm finding the driving around the country, the packing up the car on a Friday morning, getting there, doing dinner, and then having 2 really long days on Saturday or Sunday from like 6:30 a.m. to 10 p.m., which is usually what it is. Dishwashers breaking, and then coming back Monday afternoon, and then having to go back into my teaching job on a Tuesday. It's just too much. And I'm in my 40s now. My body is telling me it's too much as well. So I've run around for quite a few years, just trying to do everything. And yeah, so I'm not sure I want to do that anymore as much. Every time I get to a retreat and I'm cooking there and I'm in the moment, I absolutely love it and really vibe off it. But it's the kind of, it's just the beforehand and the afterwards, it's just started to feel a bit too much. And actually, and as a consumer, I haven't been on a retreat for a really long time because every time I go on one, I find I can't relax because I'm too interested in what's going on or coming out of the kitchen. So it'd be nice to actually be able to enjoy the whole retreat environment as a customer again. So,
Yeah, you deserve it. It sounds like to just relax and have somebody cook for you.
yeah, that'd be nice.
Mhm. So what do you do as a food educator?
And so I work in a venue called the Garden Museum in London, which is a museum all about gardens and garden design and what goes on in gardens. And as part of our learning program, which teaches people all about the natural world and arts and crafts and anything that you might think might happen there in a cultural organisation. We've got a teaching kitchen, so I run cookery classes for kids, families, adults, from there, all based on vegetables, really. So anything you might grow in your garden at home, but just getting people more interested in eating plants. Yeah,
You like that? That sounds fun. And then you
it's
have
fun. Yeah.
do you go out into the garden and actually pick things and
Yeah, so we're based in central London, so we do have access to a garden, but it's quite small, so it's quite an urban area. One might say it's not the right venue for a museum about gardens, but I think the whole reason it exists is because lots of people in London don't have their own garden. I don't have my own garden. I live in a flat. So to be able to, enthuse about gardens in an urban environment is what we do. But we do have a small garden, so yeah, we got herbs and little bits of vegetables that we grow for projects and things, but mostly we have to buy the produce thing, which is a bit sad.
yeah. I was back when I was really interested in when I was living in an apartment, we were learning a lot about gardens on the rooftops. I don't know if
Oh
they
yeah,
do
yeah,
that
yeah.
in London. That's really, or in containers, even in a parking lot.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much you can grow. It just takes somebody with a bit of knowledge and energy to do it. So I've got a balcony and I do grow herbs and bits and pieces here, but I've realised I don't know what I'm doing. And also don't get very much sun because I face north. So the north facing in the northern hemisphere, you don't get much sun. You need south facing really to get the sun in order to make things grow because it's generally not warm enough. But yeah, you can grow lots in tiny containers and small spaces. So everyone can grow something, even if it's just, micro herbs that you can, pea shoots you can use for garnishes, like anything can be grown anywhere. You just kind of need to put a bit of know how to do that.
I think that would be a great retreat to just teach people how to grow these little things that you see on, viral videos on Instagram or
Yeah.
YouTube or wherever. And then you're there watching it on your phone thinking, oh, that's so easy, but you don't actually go and do it. Sometimes it takes going somewhere where someone's like, okay, we're going to do this. And you're forced to do it. And then
Yeah.
doing it with your hands gives you the muscle memory.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't worked at actually some venues. I worked in this beautiful venue in Sicily 2 years ago. And they had this huge herb garden out the back of the kitchen. So every day I'm like harvesting basil, purple basil and green basil and thyme. And they were like, can you not use it all? Please leave some left for the next people that are here. But like, it's just so magical to be able to bring that stuff. And actually, I did just work one place in the UK. I'm now remembering they had their own allotment. They were like, yeah, just go and pick whatever you want. It's like, what? This is amazing.
Nice.
And like the food tastes incredible when you do that. So, yeah, it's really nice to be able to do that. I wish more venues kind of had herb gardens and stuff like that. But, not everyone thinks about these things when they find a venue. So,
Mm. Well, maybe you can find the place here on Retreat Builder.
yeah.
There's a place in Mexico that a friend of mine owns. I always mess up the name. It's like Rancho La Tahuacan. That's not it. It's something like that. And he has a huge greenhouse with like tomatoes and cucumbers and a bunch of other stuff there. So it's a big property. There are venues where you can definitely have like a farmstead cooking retreat.
Yeah.
I'm sure in France too. I
Nice.
mean, in Europe, it's full of
Oh, for sure.
countryside
Yeah.
places.
There's lots of beautiful venues. They just take someone to maintain it all, doesn't it? And that's often why it doesn't happen.
Exactly. Okay, so let's talk some more about tips. Is there anything that you can think of that I might not know to ask because it's not in your bio and it's not on your website about cooking for retreats? Like if you had to tell your younger self when in your first year of cooking for retreats, now looking back, what are some things you would tell yourself?
Okay, so I always remember the first retreat that I did because I made my menu far too complicated. This is the classic thing, and almost killed myself trying to get all the foods done I just gave myself too many things to do because I try to show off. You're trying to impress people, right? So I think trying to do when you're like, oh, I'll make mayonnaise that will go with that burger, and I'll make the bread, and I'll make this, and it just became. Also, when you're in a new kitchen or you don't know where anything is, everything takes longer. So I would say make things really simple. That is a great tip. It's really hard to do this, but I always recommend if you can get into the venue within plenty of time. So when I've worked abroad, I like to travel out the day before, which retreat owners don't like doing because often they have nowhere to sleep the night before. But if you don't get them the night before, you're just catching up the entire time. So if you can get there the day before, you have time, you can get into the kitchen, you can do your shop nice and chilled without being stressed. You can, sometimes I make a couple of cakes on the first day so that they're done. Anything you can do to get ahead so that when you're cooking, you never know what's going to come at you. Usually a dishwasher will break. That always happens. And you're left hand washing a gazillion pots and pans and crockery when you should be working on the food prep. So I always try and get ahead just so you can, in case of any emergencies for things like that. We had a huge problem once. I was in France and it took us 3 hours to get out of the airport to pick up a hire car. I was with the 2 yoga teachers. For various reasons, there was a bomb scare in the airport. There was a long queue. It was just, couldn't make it up. And I
Goodness.
had like an hour to get to the supermarket, buy all the food, come home, and then cook all the dinner. And I managed to do it all and only stay for dinner about half an hour later. I think I bought a tart for dessert. And that was so stressful. And then today, you're like, it's not rocket science. It's not open heart surgery. It shouldn't really be stressful. It's food, it's cooking. But, sometimes these situations are. So anything that you can do to avoid the whole thing is always really useful. So yeah, get ahead. Um, I'd say it was a given, but learning how to handle and manage allergies is a big part of. I mean, it's a big part of cooking, whoever you are and whoever you're cooking from. But for some reason, on retreats, there's always people who've got intolerances for this, that, and the other. And sometimes the combination of them makes meal planning really difficult. So I try and plan meals where everyone gets the same thing, because that is easier for me as a chef, and it's easier for serving, and it means you're less likely to give the person someone the wrong thing because you're making sure everyone has the same. It's not always possible, but that can get difficult the more complicated the combination of allergies are. So you just need to be really well trained in substitutions and making sure that you know who the people who've got the allergies are, so that you know that they're getting the right food and one. I could talk a lot more about that. It's always a bit of the bane of my work as a chef, but
You want to share a
we do
story?
our best. Well, I've never poisoned anyone or given anyone an anaphylactic shock or anything.
Well, that's good.
Hopefully. But I remember once had there's one person in the group that's allergic to nuts. That's quite normal for there to be at least one. You think, well, that's fine. I'll put a jar of peanut butter out on the breakfast buffet with its food, and it's labelled, and everything's labelled. And you come back to the buffet half an hour later, and someone's put the peanut butter spoon in the fruit compote. You're like, great, who did that? And just because maybe you don't have an allergy and you don't understand that is problematic. So I like to stop the whole breakfast table, and I was like, who's the person with a nut allergy? Have you eaten that? Are you okay? And I think that was I think sometimes when there is nut allergies, I might decide not to serve any at all, because I get really scared of something like that happening. And that's of nuts flying around and contamination. I guess it depends on how what someone's allergy is, because some people are fine with them in the room and some people aren't. So I guess always knowing that is really helpful. That was kind of like one of the worst, scary moments for me. I was like, what? Can we not do that? And it was done very innocently by someone who just hadn't really thought about it or understood. So yeah, labeling stuff is a good idea. But then people don't always understand that either. So you're not responsible for everybody's actions.
That's a great tip, because I would never, like you said, I don't have a nut allergy, so I wouldn't think about that. But just mixing the wrong spoon in something else, how that could really.
With gluten as well. If you've got a celiac, they won't use the toaster that someone else has used. If someone's gluten intolerant, they don't care. Most of the time, not all the time, depends on who they are. So it's quite difficult when you don't. I wish somebody would tell me what their allergy was. If I just get told gluten, are you a celiac? I'd quite like to know if you were, because that's very different from someone who avoids gluten because it might make them a little bit bloated, or they're just giving up for other health reasons rather than it's actually going to make them sick. So and I do ask the dietaries, I need them 2 weeks before the retreat, because I will plan my menu around them to make life easier for me. But that often I get told them at the 11th hour. It's really annoying. Yeah. So and you're not a restaurant. Like, a restaurant should have enough staff that they can, pick and make sure that there's at least one thing on the menu you can eat. When you're in the wilderness of Southwest France, 20 minutes drive from the supermarket, there's not much you can do about it last minute. If you haven't got any food, you haven't got any food.
And how do you work with people? You mentioned having a chef assistant, and how do you go about expanding like that and hiring help? Do you just go with people you know and friends, or is there another way?
Usually people I know. So my preference generally is to work on my own, because it's a lot easier. it's great having somebody's help with you in the kitchen, and they're always really good company, and it's really fun. I always forget until I do it. It's like, oh, you have to download from your brain and explain to someone else rather than just doing it yourself. I mean, that's like anything management wise, isn't it? It's like, it's easy to do it yourself, but actually it's not. Um, yeah, quite often, there are so many people who want to get into the industry who are looking for experience. I used to work sort of teaching on a very similar course to the one that I did in California. Specifically, I used to taught on that for a bit. And there were lots of people on that who were looking for experience. So I hired them as an assistant a couple of times to try and, and actually for someone who's assisting, they don't necessarily need to have done chef training. They just need to be confident with a knife and have initiative and be prepared to work really hard. And if you can do all of those things, then it's a great opportunity to learn. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you were someone that ticks all those boxes, where would I find somebody like you to work with? Or is there like a chef forum?
I would write, not that I know of, I would write to a retreat. I've had loads of approaches by email of people who've found my website or seen my work and have approached me. I don't like to really work with people until I've met them first, because you often have to share a bedroom and you literally spend 4 days with each other's companies. If you haven't met someone, that's not ideal. But yeah, I've had those approaches. I'm always happy to chat to people. Obviously, I don't want any more approaches because I'm not doing any more. I've already got a couple of people that I regularly work with if I do. But most of the time, different chefs will have a different approach to at what point they need an assistant and what point they don't. And sometimes it's budgetary, sometimes it's not. It depends on the venue. Some venues are harder work than others just with the way that they're laid out. Some retreat owners are more demanding in terms of how much they want served on a retreat. So it varies quite a lot.
What about tips with working and communicating with the retreat host or organizer?
Oh, I guess most people I worked with, actually, not all. No, that's not true. Actually, quite a lot of people I knew anyway, or have worked with multiple times. So the more you work together, the easier it gets. I do, and this is not something I did to start with. And again, I regret this as well as my fee issue is, having a sort of written agreement beforehand. So I have a booking form where I want all the information that I need and getting that all filled in and making sure that they're able to communicate with me what's in the kitchen at the venue, and I'll speak to the venue if they don't want to do that. And just being really professional about the way that you work with people, especially if they're your friends. It's really important that you do that, because that can be a really hard dynamic to get right. If you know someone and you're mates with them and you suddenly have to work together and you haven't kind of laid down some ground rules. I'm very particular about, I've worked on a couple of retreats where people have had alcohol, which is totally fine, completely up to them. And then I've come down to the kitchen the next morning to be faced with 3,000 wine glasses that they've just left there for me because I'm the chef to clear them up. And I'm like, whoa, my job is to look after the food and everything that goes with that. Do you want to have your own little party afterwards? I don't care, but I'm not washing up after you. And so laying down some ground rules with working with people and what you are happy to do and what you will expect them to do or to look after is really important. And it's really good to get all of this kind of ironed out before you start actually at the retreat, because you don't want to be having those conversations on the first day when everyone's stressed, because it's always really stressful on the first day. So yeah, that's what I would say. I often, if I don't know somebody in advance, we have a chat over Zoom, get to know each other, talk through the retreat. I'd ask them what kind of things they might want on a menu before I produce it. Yeah.
That's a really good tip. There's a saying in Spanish, cuentas claras, amistades largas, which is clear accounts, long friendships, essentially, is what it means. And it's like,
yeah,
if you don't have it written down, usually the fangs come out when shit hits the fan. And if you don't have, if you just like, look, we signed a document, and then it's like, okay, everyone goes back into their logical brain and puts the emotion to the side to remember, this was the agreement, and there's no emotions.
Yeah.
versus if you don't
It's
have
very,
that.
it can get so, I think, I always have a point on a retreat. Usually if it's like a 4 night, 3 night retreat, which most of them are these days, I'd be like, at the end of the second day, if I'd managed to get past that point without having an emotional breakdown, I'm like, okay, this weekend's been fine because you're at a breaking point of being tired and exhausted. And, you know, anything can literally be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And if it's something that's like that you haven't agreed in advance that suddenly you have to do or sort out, yeah, the emotions from, being in that environment and like living in this little village together can get very it's very different from people being in their normal lives. So protecting yourself from all of that by agreeing stuff beforehand is really important. I'm like, I do like retreat owners to like decide on the schedule in advance, and I like them to stick to it if they can. And I obviously appreciate that things change, and that's fine. But it's really helpful as a chef. I quite like to know I plan my entire day out according to when I'm going to have a break. And if you move the meal time, it means I can't have my break. Whoa, I'm going to get really tired and crabby and sad and stressed. Um, so yes, just trying to be a bit more flexible on each side. And that's not because I don't want to be flexible. It's because I'm literally trying to plan my life so that I can have enough energy to serve you. So that's quite important as well.
That's a really good tip, because a lot of times when we're speaking with facilitators, it's, learning how to release control, let go, be flexible, be adaptable. And yes, but there's always the opposite end of the spectrum, or like the other side of the coin, where it's like, okay, yes, be flexible and be adaptable, but maybe find the places in which you can take those liberties. Because like you said,
Yeah.
cooking, sometimes, especially when it's for a large crowd, you have to plan in advance. How long does it take for this to happen? And how long does this need to be in the oven? And how long, and then keeping the meal hot, or, if it's cold, it's fine. But so that
Yeah.
it's cooking is a lot about timing.
Yeah. And they're like, oh, I've had this before, not for a long time, actually. Oh, we started really long shavasana. They're like coming out of the yoga room like 20 minutes late. And I'm like, okay, well, dinner is not as good as it would have been because it's now overcooked. The great thing about cooking vegetarian cuisine actually is that it can be a lot more flexible with timings. So the odd time I've done meat or fish, which I do get asked to do from time to time, I'm like, this is the time I'm serving. Like it can't, because you have to work till that time, otherwise it would just be ruined. And that as a chef, that's really frustrating because then your food doesn't turn out. I'm like, this is not how I want it to be. I wanted it to be this, and it's not because your timings have mucked me up. But like a 15 minutes here or there that about earlier on in the day, it's totally fine. But it's when things start shifting a lot, or they go, or everyone goes out for the day. Yeah, that's what's happened as well. Everyone's gone out for the day, and I'm meant to be making lunch. And they tell me on the day, yeah, no one's having lunch. And I'm like, I bought all the food, done all the prep. There are a few things like that I'm like, it's just not kind of having thought through the implications that it can have on the chef when you change things. So, or nobody tells me like 5 people have gone out for the day and you've made lunch for 20 people and 15 people turn up and then there's loads of food left over. It's just a waste.
Mm-hmm. How have you worked to reduce the waste produced at retreats? Is there a lot of waste, or?
There isn't. So I try really hard to not have any leftovers. Like in the UK, it's a bit easier because if there are leftovers, I just like leftover raw produce. I just take it home or ask the retreat owner if they want to take it home or whoever wants it. But abroad, it's a bit harder because you obviously can't do that. So I just work really. I'd say I'm really good at estimating, apart from when I'm cooking for 50, how much food we get. So I've done it so many times. You kind of see visually if it's going to be enough, it's not going to be enough, so that there aren't leftovers. So, you always make a little bit extra to make sure that, servings are plentiful, but trying to plan not to have leftovers for food because, it's a waste of money and it's a waste of food. Bad for the environment to be wasting food. And things like especially on a longer retreat abroad, the last day, I never plan the menu until nearer the time in case you want to use whatever's left over. Frittata is always like my last morning breakfast, because a frittata is a great way of using all the odds and ends of vegetables. And it's always delicious, whatever you put in it. So that's a good way to use things up a lot. Um, yeah, so try and plan it as much as possible, but then leaving the last bit a bit more flexible, so you're not having to go out and buy stuff when you've already got stuff, because you want to make the most of that.
Yeah. I like that. That's smart. Mhm. What about bringing your own tools? How do you feel about like lugging around a huge suitcase full of all of your kitchen stuff?
Yes. I take my knives everywhere I go. So if you're flying abroad, you've got to put them on the suitcase in the hold. And everyone else has got their tiny little suitcases that go in the airplane, and you can't do that. They've got to go in the hold. So it's always more expensive as well, which always annoys people. But I'm like, you just don't know what the knives are going to be like when you get there. And I can't cook with knives that don't sharpen things. It's just annoying. Um, and like some venues I've worked at are really well kitted out because they're retreat venues and they know what chefs need. And others are diabolical. Like there's not, it's meant to be a large catering venue. They don't even have a large saucepan. So I try and speak to the venue owner beforehand for them to tell me what they've got in their kitchen. And then I usually panic that it's not enough and bring my own anyway. So I drive my stuff everywhere I go. So I always take my big high-powered blender, because I can't live without that, and a food processor, sometimes electric whisk, sometimes doing cake tins because you don't trust what they're going to have. No one ever has enough mixing bowls. And I like the big mixing bowls because you need lots of people. You can't have enough bowls to mix stuff. That's the one thing that does my head in. And then I've got a big, large catering saucepan I take everywhere with me as well. And all of that, it's just a big plastic tub that I shove in the back of the car. Yeah. And then when you're abroad, it's a bit harder because you can't take that with you. And you can chef if you haven't got a car. It's just a bit harder because you wouldn't be able to take all of that with you. I've taken my big high-powered blender with me to France. Did I take it to Sicily? No, because they had stuff. I took it to France and then got stopped going through security, and they had to unpack the suitcase because they didn't know what it was. And my French is terrible, so we had this whole like pigeon conversation. What is that? I'm like, makes the smoothies. It was really funny.
Oh,
But yeah, that's all that, and you know, all of that can go in your suitcase. It's just very bulky, and then you can't take enough clothes. But
okay.
yeah, taking all of that stuff with me. But you know, there are some ways you can make things easier. You can get really good hand stick blenders these days, like catering ones that are really powerful. I used one a couple of years ago, and I thought it's easier than taking my big, you know, Vitamix style blender. Um, so yeah, I think if I did a lot more cooking abroad and you were always moving, you'd get your kit really like you should invest in. You'd get a really good, solid little kit that you can take with you everywhere. Yeah,
Mhm.
or just persuade venues to actually just buy the equipment themselves. That would be helpful.
Yeah. Good tips. This has just been really insightful. So, is there anything else? Any message that you'd like to share with with the retreat community, or maybe something about your book that you want to share, or both?
Um, just yeah. I don't know. I'd just say have fun and don't take it too seriously. Retreats, but whilst also being really professional about the way you do it. I've really, really enjoyed doing retreat chef work, and I found it really, really fulfilling. But it is really hard work. So as long as you're prepared that it's hard work and that you treat your chefs well, they'll be happy. So one venue I worked at, and she's like, "Oh, it's amazing! You've got everything." And she says, "Happy chef, happy guests." And I was like, "Thank you. I wish more people had said that." It's like when you have your setup perfect, or as near to perfect as can be, it just makes everything so much easier. And then you're not working in the grind. And I feel like some of the worst retreats that I've done, where I don't feel like I've quite done my best, have been where the venue has just made things really difficult. Like there isn't enough space, there isn't enough storage space. So yeah, if you keep the chef happy, they will create beautiful food in return.
I don't know whether to say apple, amen, all the things. Yes.
And I'm sure for any retreat leader would say the same. If you're happy, you're thriving, you kind of do your best. You'll give your best. So
Mhm. And I want to
and
see
build
what.
your kitchen. Yeah, as I say, like build your kitchen with a window with a nice view. I've
Yes.
cooked in some kitchens that are like in there because traditionally in England, all these big country houses that you do retreats in, like the kitchen's sort of like around the back, at the back of the house. It's
Hmm.
miserable. And then you go somewhere where it's been thought of and it's beautiful and you have something to look at while you're doing all the washing up.
Yeah, that happened in one of the retreats that we had in Mexico. And the house was huge, beautiful house. The property was huge, and the kitchen was in a little dark room in the back. It was awful. And
Yeah,
I'm not a chef, but I was cooking. I made the choice to cook at the
well
retreat.
done.
And it was like an oven in there. I was sweating. It was terrible. I felt very lonely. And it just shows the mentality of how things used to be. It's like, oh, the cook
Yeah,
is in the
yeah.
back, you know? So, but making it part of the experience,
Oh
bringing it
yeah,
in the
like
center of the house.
yeah, like I was saying earlier, like some chefs don't like people in the kitchen, but I'm not. I do because if I'm cooking on my own, it can get really lonely. Like, please come in and make a cup of tea and have a chat with me while I'm cooking because much for me, I don't mind at all. And and it brings the food into the retreat. I think until you've done a retreat as a yoga teacher, maybe I don't quite often people don't kind of understand how important the food is. That's part of the retreat. I'm like, you eat 3 times a day, if not more sometimes. It's where everyone sits together, enjoys their food around a table together. It's a big part of bringing the community together on a retreat in a very different way to like what might go on in a yoga room. And that's wonderful. It's just different. And so it's like, don't underestimate that if you've never done a retreat before, like how important the food is, which is why chefs charge a certain amount of money and why they need you to taffy. I mean, I've been on retreat as a guest before. I won't say where, it was a long time ago, where the food was terrible. We still had a wonderful retreat, but it does alter the way that you enjoy it, I think, and having the guests have satisfaction. And so, yeah, food's really important.
I agree. And can you choose one recipe to share with us? Maybe like put the book from your book that's your favorite.
Oh yeah, so this is one of my favorite things that I've been cooking on a retreat over the last few years, and it works really well in doesn't have to be served really, really hot, and it's really nice one to do. So this is, you probably can't see that very well, is a text-based book. It's with lovely illustrations. So this is a cauliflower recipe. There's my
Oh.
cauliflower picture. Oh, cheddar. Beautiful drawings. And it's cauliflower steaks. So we have a nice little
Oh.
slab of cauliflower. Served over pre-lentils. So, they're dark green speckled lentils. They don't have to be pre ones and fancy French ones. Um, with a salsa verde over the top. So it's quite fresh. And that's quite a Mediterranean vibe recipe. And I usually do that with 1 or 2 seasonal sides, maybe a leafy salad or like a plain tomato salad in the summer. This is me keeping it simple because there's so much flavor in this. You don't want something really complex going on the side. Like, you could do something like there's a lovely carrot recipe, salad recipe in here, but I think that's too complicated. You want it really simple. Um, but when I do it on a retreat, I never do the cauliflower steaks because when you cut a steak, you get all the wastage of the cauliflower. And there's nothing you do with it. So I do really like nice wedges of cauliflower. So either a quarter or a sixth, depending on the size of the cauliflower, and then crisp up the leaves as well, and then serve them as a garnish.
Mm.
And that I've done so many times, and it's quite stress-free for cooking. So the lentils can be cooked and held for a bit. The cauliflower can be a bit flexible with it. So you can cook it, and then if they're not quite ready for dinner, you can then warm it up in the oven. It's not going to overcook in the way that a piece of fish or meat would. So yeah, I've done that quite a lot. The stuffed aubergines I've done an awful lot. They're in here on retreats as well. They're some of my favourites. So yeah, and loads of soups, and loads of salads. I went through this earlier. I was like, I've cooked so many of the things in here on a retreat, um, in the past. So yeah, lots of things can be done.
I also love that you keep it simple because, like you said, I mean, there are a lot of complex dishes that taste amazing, and there's a space for that. There's a space for everything.
Yeah,
But I
of course.
really
Yeah.
like the focus on one thing, because it's almost like going back to basics, and then you're spotlighting this one vegetable, and so you're savoring all the different tastes, like the cooking style, the seasoning, the uh natural flavors of whatever that vegetable is, where normally if you're mixing it with a lot of other things, it kind of
Yeah.
gets lost. And
Yeah. Yeah. I get it. It's just that people often say to me, "Oh, your recipes are really simple," and I'm like, "Yeah, it is." And it's like they've missed a trick, and they're like, "Oh, I thought it should be complicated to taste good." I'm like, "No, you just need to cook it really well and season it really well and pair it with the right things, and then you've got a beautiful dish in your hands." And it doesn't have to be complicated in order to taste good. It's much easier to plan when you've made things simple, and can still be stunning dish. Like, in my early days of doing this, the first dish I cooked when I did a retreat was like a lentil spaghetti bolognese. And I wouldn't do something like that anymore, because I think as a chef and the way that I design my menus has evolved quite a lot. But that's like a really like key. That's really simple. It worked really, really well. So there's a place for everything. But I do like to do my things that look fancy, but actually they're not fancy at all. They're really simple.
that's awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all of your retreat cooking wisdom.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me to chat.